I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands, now officially one of over 36 podcasts dedicated to the finer points of face punching. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is Patrick Wyman, the good doctor, and today we have a confusing slurry, but a very exciting slurry of fights to talk about. Just, I guess you could call this a smorgasbord episode, Pat, one of our classic smorgasbords, but we are going to be covering much of UFC 215. We are going to be looking back at the Superfly boxing card, which delivered some seriously memorable action and some dramatic results. And we are going to be looking forward to Triple G, Gennady Golovkin versus Saul Canelo Alvarez, and Luke Rockhold versus David Branch, the upcoming UFC fight night. So a whole lot of stuff to get through. First of all, how you doing, Pat?
I'm doing pretty dang good. Got a lot of fun fights to talk about and a lot of fun fights coming up. Like, it feels like a real fight week.
Yes, it does. I appreciate your verve. Without any further ado, though, let's jump in. 215. We'll kick it off with the main event. Obviously, well, I say obviously. I haven't actually been that keyed in this weekend. I had to catch up on these fights after the fact. I assume there's some controversy out there about the decision.
There absolutely is some controversy about the decision. Not a ton. I mean, like, and I don't know about you, Connor. I scored the fight for Shevchenko. I scored it 3-2 for her.
I did as well.
But I'm not, like, mad that the decision went the other way. Like, my sympathy for, even though I scored it for Shevchenko, my sympathy for fighters who go out and do the thing that she did there, which is more or less exactly what we talked about before the fight. My sympathy for fighters who go out and do that and try to win a fight like that is pretty limited, because you have to be aware of the risks of going out there and playing a low output counterpunching game against somebody who has clearer power, who is going to take what you give them for long stretches of the fight, to the point where, like, even if you feel like you have a good case to make for why you won the fight, why you lost it is also very clear. You know?
Yeah.
So
my
sympathy
say
is pretty limited?
Yeah, I can feel that. I mean, I feel some sympathy for Shevchenko, but it wasn't it wasn't a robbery by any stretch. And did I say something last week about, like, wanting Shevchenko to throw like 30% more jabs? I think I said something along those lines. Wouldn't that have made a tremendous difference in this fight?
It would have made a huge difference. I mean, what's funny to me is, like, we all got focused on the wrong things here. I think the broad narratives got focused on the wrong things here leading into the fight, which was, is Nunes going to gas? Can Shevchenko finish her late if she gasses? Can Nunes finish her early? And really, the scenario that you and I pointed to, and we actually spent a little time talking about this. I think we spent probably more time talking about this particular scenario than most people who were analyzing the fight, was just a low output kickboxing match where Nunes didn't give Shevchenko huge opportunities. Shevchenko didn't really do anything stupid, but she also didn't really try to take control of the fight and push a pace. So what you ended up with was a low output, hard to score kickboxing match.
Yeah, not a bad fight necessarily. I thought it was pretty compelling, actually, but very difficult to score. And you don't, as a fighter, you don't want to be in a fight that's difficult to score. You want to make put your stamp on every minute that you're able to. I mean, credit to Shevchenko for dislocating her finger in the first round. Did you catch that?
No.
Oh, the finger on her left hand got knocked out. Nunes punched her, and she immediately grabbed her hand. She went back to her corner, and it was at a weird angle, and her cornerman popped it in, and she said it was fine. And that was the last they'd mentioned it, which was pretty badass.
That's pretty baller.
Yeah, I just wish she would. She's got a great jab, man. Like, she probably got the best jab in this division. And I think she could have won that game against Nunes more convincingly if she just touched her more, just keep a little more volume out there. And also, I thought she was going for a sort of strategy of forcing Nunes to fight at a high pace, and I thought it was working. But, with Nunes coming in a little more controlled, whether that was a great thing or, kind of a gambit for her as well, Shevchenko, just like in the first fight, was never able to take Nunes over the edge and to finish her or put her in real danger. And because Nunes came in and didn't just gas out dramatically, it meant that she didn't win a lot of the rounds that cleanly, but also Shevchenko did not have like the easy excuse to even be as aggressive as she was in the third round of their first fight, because Nunes was still there, ready to hit her back.
Yeah, I was deeply frustrated by this fight because I agree that it was compelling in the sense of the tactical and strategic wheels within wheels that were playing out as the fight went on. But what was frustrating to me was like both fighters had chances to put a stamp on it.
Yeah.
Both fighters could have approached this much differently than they did, without making the core risk that they were dealing with such a thing that they were giving the fight away. Mm-hmm. Like Amanda Nunes threw 176 strikes in 25 minutes. She threw about 7 strikes a minute. If you can't fight 25 minutes throwing more than 7 strikes a minute, frankly, I don't think you deserve to win a fight. Like, that is such an incredibly low output. Yeah. And Shevchenko, conversely, threw 194, so she threw a little bit more, but that's still an incredibly low output.
It's for something that's just a kickboxing match. It's like 23 minutes of kickboxing.
Yeah, that's the thing about this is there were not like huge stretches of clinch grinding or wrestling or grappling that would explain low output numbers. Like if you have a fight where you're doing a lot of wrestling and grappling and there are transitions on the mat and you don't really have opportunities to throw strikes, that's one thing. Both fighters had every opportunity to throw more. Mm-hmm. So like the landed strike numbers don't look that appallingly bad, but the thrown strike numbers in this fight is more what gets me. Like neither of them really tried to do a ton, and they both had good reasons for that. Shevchenko was afraid that she was going to give Nunes opportunities to duck under, take her down, finish her on the mat. Nunes was deathly afraid of gassing, and so both of them fought the safest possible fight. Like it reminded me so much of the Woodley-Thompson fights, though it was a little better than that. Yeah, it reminded me so much of the dynamics where both of them, I think, were focused on the wrong thing going in.
Yeah, you could say that. That's kind of what I was trying to allude to before, is the fact that like Nunes is stuck in a difficult position with this particular style matchup because she's afraid of gassing. She can't afford to go out there and gas, but she's not quite like slick enough to decisively win that low output fight that we both thought it might be a good idea for her to go into this fight with it, and it turns out that it was. But in terms of how the fight actually played out, it did not look like she was in control. It didn't look like a championship performance. In fact, I think you would not be completely like out of your mind if you came into this fight blind and assumed that it was Shevchenko putting on the conservative champion's performance, where she just did a little bit better job of having generalship, of having control, of feeling the rounds as they went by. Whereas Nunes would have some bursts, and then her way of keeping herself from gassing was to just not throw for long stretches of time. And so it was like one woman was just not throwing, and then the other one was waiting for them to stop, and then they would start throwing. You know what I mean? It wasn't great. I thought it was compelling. I didn't think it was as bad as Woodley-Thompson, but it did end up a little flat, especially in comparison to some of the other fights in this card. Why don't we move on? Rafael dos Anjos, we'll spare a few quick words for him, but I think we mentioned that he might kick and take down Neil Magny and then out-grapple him. I think we mentioned that he might be like a combination of Lorenz Larkin and Damian Maia in terms of Neil Magny opponents, and that's kind of how it looked.
Yeah, so I turned to my dear friend Jay, who was watching the fights with me on Saturday night, and I said, just watch. Dos Anjos is literally going to kick Magny's legs out from under him, and he's going to get on top. Like, I never do the whole, like, I literally called it, but I literally called it. Like, because of the way that Magny takes low kicks, if you kick him right, he will go – he won't just take the kick. He won't just absorb the kick. He will literally fall down onto the ground. Yeah. That's happened many times before, and that's exactly what Dos Anjos did with the first strike that he threw. I mean, it was like that outcome, I think, should have been even more predictable than it was. I think we both thought that Dos Anjos would win the fight.
We agreed. We agreed it was a bad matchup for Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I expected it to be quite that one-sided, but man, RDA's top game is as good as anybody out there except for maybe Maia in this division, at least. I mean, we can talk about other top games in other divisions, but like he is just devastating.
Yeah.
He's so slick, so smooth. Magny is not that easy to hold down.
No, that's the thing. That's like only Damian Maia does this kind of stuff to Neil Magny on the ground, or has in the past. And Dos Anjos looked as dominant as Maia did on top. The way that he threatened mount, Magny defended it, and he hopped to side control. Then he kneed him in the gut, made him think about the knee, and then just stepped right into mount, kind of off of a knee fake almost, and then beat him up a little bit, waited for him to roll, and instead of taking the back like Magny expected, he jumped on the arm triangle and put him away. He just had an answer. Like, he was ready for every single move Magny made on the ground. And I think that's something we don't celebrate enough, is that RDA is a really intelligent fighter. I know he's not like a very interesting person. He's not very charismatic to most fans, and I get that. But like, we're looking at a guy who left Rafael Cordero's tutelage. That could be a bad move for a lot of fighters. He seems to have put a good team together around himself. He seems very self-aware. He made a smart move to move up to welterweight before it was too late. And he even talked about the Saffiedine fight in his post-fight interview, said how he was kind of feeling out the division in that fight. He had to make some adjustments, and he felt better coming into this camp. Everything is like a learning experience for him, which is great. Like, he hasn't taken the loss to Alvarez super hard, or the loss of the McGregor matchup or anything. He's just still being RDA, just now at 170. He looks really good.
Yeah, he is kind of a poster child, and I think we may have actually talked about this like a couple of years ago, for fighters who were candidates to age well. And Dos Anjos falls into the category with things that we were looking for in that he was durable. He had fought pretty regularly. He hadn't taken like a whole bunch of awful career-defining injuries. He's tough, like in fights. He's got a deep base of skill, and he's athletic enough that when he loses a step, him losing a step still means that he's like a competent enough athlete to compete, given the depth of skill that he has. Yeah. So, like, there's good reasons to think RDA could be competitive at the upper echelons of this division for another year or two, sure, at least.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all. He looked in fantastic form and looked physically a little better than he did in the previous fight as well. I think he's settling in at 170, and I'm excited to see where he goes.
What do you think about a matchup between him and Tyron Woodley? Because it certainly sounds like at this point, in the absence of anything else happening, that's what they're going to try and do.
I think it's possibly the most compelling fight for Tyron Woodley in the division, because it's somebody who will always be coming forward and who will stand on the end of Tyron Woodley's punches as he backs into the fence. So it's someone who will not allow Tyron Woodley to neutralize their pressure like past opponents have. I think it's a great matchup.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the way that people are going to approach it is they're going to say, RDA will make him fight. And I don't think that's quite it. It's that RDA is going to make it impossible for Woodley to play the kind of game he's played against Maia and and Thompson.
He can't just be a neutralizer.
Yeah, like because RDA is going to throw. We know that. Like, RDA is going to push a pace. RDA is going to work volume. If Woodley does the kind of stuff that he's been doing here, that he's been doing over these last few fights, RDA will just kick his legs and kick his body, and he'll toss out a jab, and he'll take what you give him in a way that those other guys really couldn't or wouldn't. Maia can't fight in a way where he takes what you give him. He doesn't have the energy to do that. His kickboxing is still too limited. Thompson was so gun shy that it was impossible for him to just score except in brief stretches. Yeah. RDA is not that dude.
Yeah, I think it's and yet RDA is still, because of that pressure, susceptible to the right hand, the speed, the power, the accuracy of Woodley. Yeah. So it's dangerous.
And the wrestling too. I mean, he's not like he will probably be giving up 10 to 15 pounds in the cage and a lot of wrestling skill.
Yeah, and he's not Damian Maia, but still, like, if you feel at some point against Woodley that you have to strike with him, even if Woodley just is able to neutralize RDA's wrestling so he can't grapple, which in all of his most successful performances, he has mixed striking and wrestling and grappling. And if he can't work that aspect of his game, then Woodley might be able to figure him out on the feet. So we'll see. I think it's great. And I really like to see RDA. I like to see any fighter like getting a little older and just doing well in a bigger division. And I guess that's a little bit of negative foreshadowing for the Roman Gonzalez fight we're going to be discussing a little later. But before that, why don't we talk very briefly about Henry Cejudo, who, he just mowed down Wilson Hayes, didn't he? He really just tore right through him like a piece of paper.
that was a fucking drubbing, man.
Yeah.
Like, we just watched Wilson Hayes get outthought and outfought by Demetrius Johnson for, what did it take Johnson? Like 13 minutes to finish him? Mm-hmm. Cejudo just blew his goddamn doors off.
Yeah, Wilson Hayes has had the unfortunate fate of being on the receiving end of basically two of the division's best fighters' best performances. Like, he had Demetrius Johnson's best showing, his most dominant win probably, and then the same exact thing from Henry Cejudo, and in both of them he was finished. I feel bad for him, man. I feel for Wilson Hayes because Henry Cejudo, like, he came in there and he was all confidence in a way that could be a problem against somebody who wasn't Wilson Hayes, but was the perfect way to fight Wilson Hayes.
See, I actually don't think that's the wrong way for Cejudo to fight anybody. I think Cejudo is a guy who needs to be confident in what he's doing.
Sure.
I think he's a guy who feeds off his own confidence. And we've talked a lot about that, I would say, over the last 6-8 months or so, about the importance of confidence. I think you and I are both getting to a place where we see the value of it for fighters in ways that reinforce the purely technical. I think for Cejudo is a guy who really depends on it. Like, Cejudo needs to feel like he's the one in charge. And I tweeted this during the fight, that when Cejudo is at his best, he fights like he's openly contemptuous of what his opponent can do to him.
Yes.
And I think that's a confidence thing. I think he really needs to believe that he's the baddest motherfucker in the cage. And when he doesn't fight like that, like, there were stretches, he fought that way in the first round against Joseph Benavidez. He fought that way. For some stretches in his first few UFC fights. He didn't really fight that way against Jussier Formiga, and he definitely didn't fight that way against Demetrius Johnson. Mm-hmm. And when he doesn't fight that way, when you can see the kind of doubts percolating in his mind, whether it's because he fucked up his weight cut, or whether he's just not feeling it for whatever reason, you can see that reflects in his performance. And to his credit, he's still talented enough to be credible against, like, elite fighters, even when he's, like, clearly not there. But I thought the way that he fought Wilson Hayes, if he fights Demetrius Johnson the way that he fought Wilson Hayes with that kind of confidence, I really think you could be looking at a much more compelling fight.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the only thing that worried me here was that I imagined the exact moves with a different opponent in the cage. And the few times when Cejudo would just plant his feet on the ground and throw 5 punches in a row and take 2 on the chin in the process, that kind of stuff does worry me. But maybe, like, for a guy like Cejudo, being flat, it makes you finishable by Demetrius Johnson, who's maybe not the hardest hitter in the world, but, like, being confident allows you to take clean shots from Joe Benavidez. So, like, yeah. I think maybe you're right that even there's always going to be those risks of being so confident, but it does make him a force of nature. It gives a sort of aura to his performance in the cage. And tactically and technically, he was hitting the body. He was mixing up his strikes beautifully. He was following Hayes when Hayes tried to take angles. I just thought he did a great job.
Yeah, I thought I thought he fought that pretty much exactly right. Mm-hmm. That was the correct way to fight Wilson Hayes going in there, because we've seen guys fight him like they're afraid of striking with Wilson Hayes, and, like, that's not to say that Hayes is a bad striker or anything like that, but, like, he's not the kind of dude that you should be backing down to in exchanges. No.
Because the moment you let him have some unpunished success, especially if it's with his wrestling, but even with his strikes, he kind of builds momentum a little bit. He's a little bit of a slow starter. But so, like, you just get in his face. And he kind of looked like a bad striker. Like, and I don't think Wilson Hayes is, but depending on the matchup, he's very matchup dependent. And Cejudo was able to make him look kind of amateur.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, being willing to throw 5 to take 1 or 2 back, I think that's always going to be kind of Cejudo's style, and sure. I think it's important for him to believe that he can take those shots back. Though with that said, like, the defense will come for him. It's just, I think it's easy to forget how raw he still is. He's only been fighting pro for 4.5 years.
That's a good point.
So I think there will come a time where he puts all of that together into a coherent package. But it was just really, more than anything he actually did, it was nice to see him fighting like the dude who believes that he is everything he can be. I don't know. Like, that's kind of a cliche thing to say.
No,
but,
I'm
like,
with you.
Like, Cejudo's just so fucking talented, and when he fights like he believes in his talent, he's so much more compelling than the dude who goes out there and just punches and clutches with Jussier Formiga for 15 minutes.
Yeah, it was a transcendent kind of performance. I'm with you. It was extremely impressive, and, like, after Demetrius Johnson presumably fights Ray Borg and that's rescheduled, why not Cejudo again? It automatically looks like a much more interesting fight in a rematch. Yeah. We don't have as much time as I would like, but let's very quickly before we break talk about the two other fights in this card that we wanted to touch on. We had the two featherweight bouts between Jeremy Stephens and Gilbert Melendez, and then Rick Glenn and Gavin Tucker. We both praised Rick Glenn, and I'm glad we did, because even though I picked Gavin Tucker to win in that fight, I knew that Glenn would be dangerous. And I think we saw in this fight the value of experience more than anything else. The reason that people like you and me, Pat, harp on about experience so much when we're making predictions is because of stuff like this. Because Tucker came into this fight with Glenn. He knew he needed to box in the corner after he wasted some energy in the first round and took some shots and it wasn't going his way. He got dropped. He said, I need to box. And his corner agreed. And then he came out in the second round and Glenn hit him and he started swinging. And that's Glenn just fought at Glenn's pace for the duration of the bout, and Gavin Tucker quickly faded. But the real contrast between these two, between Stephens Melendez and Glenn Tucker, is how the fights were officiated and how they were managed by the corners. Because Gilbert Melendez took some pretty gruesome punishment, especially to the leg, in his fight with Jeremy Stephens. And by the end of the Tucker fight, I mean, Pat, you said you didn't think that Tucker should have seen the third round.
No, I thought you could have stopped that fight. I thought you could have stopped that fight after the second round, and I would have been totally fine with that. Yeah. I thought you could have stopped the fight at pretty much at any point in the third round, and I would have been totally fine with that. It was, I thought, shameful that it went on as long as it did. I thought it was, especially considering the problems that commission has had recently with the death of Tim Hague. It's easy for us to forget, because as much as we can criticize a lot of the judging and the refereeing in MMA, we have to, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. You know what I mean? You are not, the contrast between the baseline as not ideal as the baseline may be and something really, really, really bad is so shocking and so striking that what we saw was really fucking terrible refereeing. Mm-hmm. And we saw really terrible work from the commission, and the same deal with what led to Tim Hague's death. That was genuine incompetence. We may bitch about a judge here or a referee there, but people like this dude should never officiate another fight in the UFC again, ever.
Absolutely not. No, I'm totally with you. There were at least 3 minutes of that fight that were objectively unnecessary. 3 minutes that should not have happened. And I think I can yell at the corners as well, and I think that they deserve a lot of the blame, that they should have been responsible for their fighters' safety. I read that Glenn broke 4 bones in his face over the course of this fight and took tons of punishment to the head. But really, it does come down on the referee. And I'll give a little bit, you always have to give some credit to the difficulty of the post of refereeing, because, for example, in the Melendez-Stephens fight, as I said, Melendez took tons of damage to his leg. He had a tennis ball under the skin of his shin from the first leg kick that Stephens threw, and it still managed to go the distance. And the distinction, why I'm okay with Jaron Vallel's refereeing in that fight and why I'm not okay with whoever the referee, whose name I hope I never have to remember, was in the Glenn Tucker fight, the difference is that Melendez was adapting. He was, even if he couldn't really intelligently defend the low kicks because he just was not technically capable of dealing with them, he was adapting the way he was fighting, and most importantly, he was not getting hit in the head cleanly over and over and over again. He was not so badly compromised that he could not stop Stephens from unloading on his chin and breaking the bones of his face.
Yeah, exactly. Stephens kicked the shit out of Melendez's leg because that's what was there to kick.
Yeah.
Not because it wasn't like he was unloading shots to his chin and punctuating combinations with low kicks just because just for the hell of it, and the leg was what happened to crack. He was kicking the leg because otherwise Melendez was intelligently defending himself. He was in the fight. He was clearly there. Jaron Vallel is a really pretty dang good referee. He has a good long track record.
He had a couple good performances on this card. Specifically, he was called on to make judgment calls in 2 or 3 of these fights, and I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, I mean, he generally has. I think there have been a couple of times in the past where I can remember him, screwing up a little bit, but nothing where you were ever like, that dude is going to get somebody killed.
Yeah,
I don't think. And I thought he handled this fight just fine.
Yeah. So one of these bouts Stevens-Melendez ended up being like, it had the potential to be sort of an inspiring performance. You got to see Melendez not necessarily looking good, but both guys really giving it their all and fighting an intelligent, well-put-together fight, relatively competitive, despite the fact that Melendez was so badly hurt. And I think that's okay. Like, that's the kind of way in which we should be allowed to view how tough fighters are. But I don't want to find out how tough Gavin Tucker is when he's being hit in the face, just taking uncontested blows to the face for 5 minutes straight. I'm not interested, and it may have seriously ruined the rest of his career, and it maybe have done some damage that he won't know about. Yeah, for years, exactly. That's some dumb damage he won't find out about till he's 50, and suddenly he starts slurring his speech. Like, it's just not a risk worth taking.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously bad for the fighter. It's bad for it's bad for the UFC. It's bad for the sport as a whole. Like, nobody who watched the last 3 minutes of that felt like they were watching a triumph of the human spirit.
Yeah, a contest. I mean? We weren't watching a contest, and that's the point. When it's not a contest, it's uninteresting, and it's bad. It's morally objectionable.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. But one moment, I want to mention this about Jeremy Stephens. Jeremy Stephens looked real good.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Zane and I... Oh, go
on. So when I was watching this with a buddy of mine, and he was like, doesn't this remind you of, like, Robbie Lawler's, like, the beginning of Robbie Lawler's run?
Yes.
That, a former outstanding athlete who's really durable, who's been around for a really long time, who's seen it all, done it all, has a lot of depth of skill, all of a sudden kind of putting it together into a coherent package.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was, I mean, we won't know until we see Stephens fight somebody maybe a little higher up the ladder than that. And, like, Stephens' track record has always been spottier than Robbie Lawler's was in terms of competing with the very elite. But, like, there's reason to think like he could go on a really nice little run here to kind of close things out.
Yeah, I agree. And Zane Simon and I were talking on the Vivisection before this event about how Stephens, a lot of his performance seems sort of contingent on how seriously he takes his opponent. If he he's capable of going in there and fighting really, really intelligently and relying on his excellent conditioning, which they shouted out during the fight, and they should have, because nobody throws heat like Jeremy Stephens. And stays so calm going into the third round. Like Jeremy Stephens, somebody other than Jeremy Stephens would have very clearly lost the third round to Renan Barão, maybe, in that kind of fight. So, yeah, credit to him. Jeremy Stephens isn't always like at his best, but when he's at his best, he's very good. And he's also one of those guys who, like a Robbie Lawler, like a Frankie Edgar, his best is getting bits and bits better with each fight. As he gets older. Well, not necessarily even each fight. That's why it's weird, right? It's like Jeremy Stephens is having the late career that Robbie Lawler should have had, like taking some losses here and there, but putting on some really great crafty performances. But the performances themselves, they're on par with some of the shit that Lawler did when he first came back to the UFC. They're impressive. They're very veteran in tone, and I appreciate that. So credit to Jeremy Stephens, credit to Gilbert Melendez for being a tough motherfucker, and I guess our thoughts for Gavin Tucker, as useless as that is, it was tough to see that fight end the way it did, so we hope he's okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to move on to the Superfly card, get through that one relatively quickly, even though I wish we could talk about it for hours, and then we will move on to our preview of Triple G, Canelo, and Rockhold versus Branch. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back. Just as the cicadas kick in outside, we're here to talk about some superflies, different kind of bug. That was a bad segue from my random cicada men. They're not bugs, they're boxers. Bugsers? Is there something there? Okay, we're talking about the Superfly card that went on HBO this weekend. Obviously, the big one that we should talk about first is the main event contest between the rematch between Roman Gonzalez and Srisaket Sorungvasai, the first guy to ever beat Gonzalez. Took a very fun, very competitive, but not inarguable majority decision over Gonzalez last time. We talked a good bit about the adjustments Gonzalez would have to make in this fight to sort of change the tone. The adjustment he seemed to have resolved himself to make was to force exchanges on Rungvisai, and that did not go his way. He tried to have the last word. Rungvisai got the last word for real and knocked Gonzalez out in the fourth round. Pretty savage knockout, too. It's kind of hard to watch such a decorated and accomplished boxer like Gonzalez go out like that. It was like watching Pacquiao get knocked out by Marquez.
Yeah, like out.
Yeah.
Like completely flattened him out.
After a pretty bad knockdown that preceded it.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised the referee didn't stop the fight after the first knockdown. Mm-hmm. I was surprised that Gonzalez made it back up.
I thought Gonzalez tricked the referee a little bit because he had enough will to muster he steadied his legs as the referee was looking in his eyes to check him, and as the referee turned to get the timekeeper's attention, he stumbled into the ropes. His legs weren't really there, but he did his best to make it appear that they were.
Yeah, it was the outcome, honestly, after about the start of the fourth round, that outcome felt pretty inevitable. It seemed pretty clear after watching the first 9 minutes of the fight that the old Chocolatito was gone, and what was left was a pale imitation. That's not to say that he never wins another fight again or anything like that, but the guy who ran off 46 straight wins, who had been on that incredible knockout streak, who had moved up in weight and been so successful, that dude was gone. Because there are many different varieties of decline that you see in a fighter. It comes in a lot of different forms. It's not as straightforward as you look at a guy and you're like, oh, that dude is clearly declined. There are a bunch of different components to that. Sometimes it's speed, sometimes it's endurance, sometimes it's judgment, sometimes it's reflexes, sometimes it's kind of stylistic diversity and the ability to do a bunch of different things under pressure.
Sometimes
there are
it's a lot of confidence that we talked about before.
Yeah, it can be a lot of different things. I think what went here were his reflexes and his decision making in the heat of the moment. Mm-hmm. But especially the reflexes. You could see he was doing the thing that he thought he needed to do. Yeah. And the plan was right. The idea was right. And he could not pull the trigger and could not execute fast enough. When Sor Rungvisai was hitting him, he was hitting him while Chocolatito was a split second away from doing the thing that he had realized that he needed to do.
Oh, he hit him on the face as he was knocked out. Yeah, he was in position to land good shots. I think he looked diminished in a way. He looked slower, as you said, the reflexes. There were still things you could see in some of the replays, Gonzalez seeing the punch coming, but not being able to react to it in time, or not having anticipated it as I think he might have a year or two ago. Which is not to say, as you alluded to, that this Roman Gonzalez would not have still beat a Carlos Cuadras or someone like that. He very well may have. His moves were still there. He just looked a little slowed down. But for me, the real extenuating circumstance, and I don't know why it didn't even seem so stark to me last time, but Rungvisai was just too big for Gonzalez. I think he's just too big and too powerful. And Gonzalez, the decision to go in there, we said last week how he's successful because he always has the last word, and Rungvisai didn't let him do that. And Rungvisai did the same thing here. The result was that Gonzalez just kept adding on layers. After the first round, he got warmed up. He had some good moments, and he would just try to pile on, largely on the inside, where I think he still did look technically superior to Gonzalez, or to Rungvisai, in the pocket, or in the clinch, in the tie-ups. But he just couldn't take the shots of Rungvisai the way Rungvisai could take his. Gonzalez would hit Rungvisai with a left to the body, and it was nothing happened. It was like hitting a tree. And Rungvisai would hit Gonzalez on the ribs, and it would be blocked. He would hit his arm over his ribs, and it would send him, he'd have to move his feet to catch his weight from falling over. And I just that's what really gave me a sort of feeling of worry for Gonzalez as a fan of his, is that I just noticed the impact of Rungvisai's punches and caught on, I think, pretty quickly to what Gonzalez was trying to do, and just thought to myself, it's not going to work. Like, I get it. It makes sense, but his fight's going to have to be perfect for it to work, because he is putting himself right in the line of fire against a big, powerful hitter.
Yeah, it just did not work. It really, really, I think it's shocking to see a plan that seems so well laid get blown out by the sheer fact of the physicality of the two fighters. Like, where you see somebody who is doing the right things, who has the right approach, and who just can't do them. Like, because the other guy, because it's just not going to work. Like, it was clear. I think it was clear by halfway through the first round that it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've had a few discussions, I think, on Twitter and elsewhere with a friend of the show, Schwan Humes, Black Jordan Breen, on Twitter, and he talks also, like, as a guy, I think he considers himself not to be a phenomenal athlete, to mostly be athletically outmatched, and likes to, he's a crafty guy when he spars with all of the various MMA fighters and boxers and everyone that he travels around and spars with. But I think he would point out here that, like, this is the sad reality of fighting. It is sad in a way that I think, like, mentally Gonzalez was still on Rungvisai's level, more or less, and clearly his training was still there, but physically Gonzalez was faded, and Rungvisai, as he was last time, was just a completely different animal to the guys that Gonzalez has spent his career fighting. Like, Wikipedia says Rungvisai is the same height as Gonzalez. Can that actually be true?
No. Well, even if it's true, I don't think it accurately reflects the physical difference between them.
No.
Like Rungvisai, he looked like he's about 15 pounds heavier.
Yes. Yeah.
He's just, like, thicker. Like, his wrists are thicker. Like, his neck is thicker. His head is bigger.
Even with Gonzalez looking a little bloated to make the weight this time, he still looked dramatically bigger than Gonzalez. To me, anyway. Maybe I'm just playing it up, because I do love that Roman Gonzalez, man. But I think there's no shame in taking a loss like this. Like, it does... Boxing fans, I'm sorry, guys. You are the worst in a very different, but on no greater standing than MMA fans. And Pat and I sometimes fall into both of those categories for the negative qualities. But some boxing fans have been shitting on people for giving Roman Gonzalez credit for challenging himself, for having such a great career, and for taking on stylistically and physically very difficult matchup and not coming out on top. And I don't know, like, you have to give him respect for that. He's fucking Roman Gonzalez, man. Like, you have to give him respect for that. And the sad reality of combat sports is that there is always a changing of the guard. Nobody can be at the top of the game forever. And we celebrate those who are there longer than they should be, but nobody can do it. And I don't think we suddenly have to start shitting on Roman Gonzalez because he finally lost. You know, like, I don't know. I thought he had the right idea too. He was just a step behind.
Yeah. Yeah, no disagreement at all.
How about the rest of the card? The fight between Naoya Inoue and Antonio Nieves was not much of a fight. Nieves did the best he could, but we also, rather than just talking about the fight and heaping praise on Inoue, we also wanted to give some credit to one of the cornermen of Nieves, the challenger to Inoue, who was Joe Delgado. You might know him from being on MMA Twitter, but he also is a boxing and MMA boxing coach at Strong Style in Cleveland.
He coaches Stipe Miocic. He worked with Cody Garbrandt years ago, coaches Jessica Ai.
Yeah, and he's worked with a lot of boxers as well, and he was cornering Nieves. And since we ended the first segment of the show in a pretty dour state about the lack of stoppage in the Tucker-Glenn fight at UFC 215, Pat, you wanted to kind of... You had a very good idea to say we should say something about how good Joe Delgado was in Antonio Nieves' corner and recognizing that his fighter was done.
Yeah, there was a point. I think it was after the fifth round, because this was stopped at the end of the sixth, if memory serves.
Yeah, before the seventh.
At the end of the fifth round, the referee walks over and he says, "You're going to need to show me something more, or I'm going to stop the fight." And Delgado says to him, like, "You're not going to need to worry about that. If he doesn't show more, I'll stop the fight." Yeah. And I thought that was really telling. It was because it sent the message both to his fighter and to the referee that, like, this wasn't going to get out of hand. Mm-hmm. And also after the sixth round, it was Delgado who stopped the fight. the referee comes over, and then I think that he was about to call in a doctor, and Delgado walks over and just waves it off.
Yeah.
Like, but that was perfect. Like, Nieves had already taken all the shots he needed to take. It wasn't getting any better. There was nothing left to look forward to. And that's one of the things to me that I really appreciate is the difference between boxing and MMA is I think boxing corners, in large part because they have so much more experience and they've been in there for so many hundreds or thousands more fights, they know when it's not going to get any better, you know?
Yeah, it's a sport, you know? Like, Joe Delgado went in there and he did a great job of being a sporting cornerman. He gave his fighter a chance, enough chance that he wouldn't take too much undue punishment, saw it wasn't going the right way, and stopped it. There's absolutely no point in sending Antonio Nieves out there on the slim chance that he might come back in a fight that has not for 1 second been going his way. So stop it. I thought it was a perfectly justifiable stoppage. Not just justifiable, like it shouldn't have to be justified. It was a good stoppage, and I agree with you. I think we should praise Joe a little bit for being, like a morally upright cornerman and looking out for his fighter's well-being, because you do not want to be in there on the end of Naoya Inoue's punches without being able to muster a response. Inoue was scary as shit. He has like a George Foreman vibe about him. Despite being a super flyweight, he just slings his hands at people. And not like stupidly, even like a younger George Foreman, he's not as crude as some people might say just because he's an aggressive power puncher. He places his shots and times them really, really well, puts them together beautifully. But he is a smasher. And I was happy that Antonio Nieves didn't have to take too many more of those hammers.
Yeah, I thought Andre Ward had a lot of interesting things to say on commentary.
Oh, I didn't get to hear Ward's commentary, so this will be news to me.
It was really good. I mean, he made some of the comparisons that you made in terms of craft. But basically, Kellerman was at one point knocking Inoue for kind of a lack of head movement and being too easy to hit. And Ward said something like he's like 24 years old. When he gets into his when he gets into his late 20s, early 30s, and people start to make him pay for it, he will probably improve when he can't just rely on his reflexes and toughness.
Yeah.
Or he won't. We're the two sides of that. But it's like if you're 24 and you're lightning fast and you're incredibly tough, like you're just not that worried about shots coming back at you from a fighter like Nieves or the other dudes that Inoue has fought to this point.
Yeah.
I think the way that he puts together shots and combinations, there is real genius in there.
Yeah.
And his jab is genius. His jab is pure genius. And I think that when you talk about craft with something like that, the ability to dictate range and pace and create openings for your power punches is a species of intelligence and craft that doesn't get recognized enough for being what it is. Yeah,
and maybe some of like this sort of the nonchalance that Inoue has as he's destroying people comes from he's just happy to commit to what he's throwing, like knowing that the other person, unless they have great defense, they can't afford to just commit as much as he's committing, because he knows he's going to hit them if they try to hit him back, and he knows he's going to hit them if they don't try to hit him back. And so he presents the image of the fighter who just happily and viciously takes anything that's given to him. But nothing feels like too forced. Even though the commentators on the broadcast I watched talked a lot about like the impact of Inoue's shots through Nieves' gloves, and that is very impressive. I would say the most impressive thing about Inoue is how he doesn't have to hit people on the gloves that much. He just takes whatever's open, and he takes it with such vicious intent that it has to get a response out of the opponent. It has to open up something else, and then he just takes that. So he has this very lackadaisical approach to just brutally destroying people with an aggressive style that is pretty scary to watch. Again, it recalls Foreman to me. And I think I mentioned George Foreman maybe on this show, or maybe I did it on this thing with Kyle.
On this show, I think.
Yeah, but I was talking about how I'd watched some of his sparring footage, and he was showing off things in the gym that he didn't do at all early in his career. And that's probably the case for Inoue as well. I would imagine he's working on some of his defense and his more boxing style things, and I would hope that they will come out. But they didn't come out from George for a while. Like he didn't really show a lot of those tricks, even though he was clearly, judging by the footage, working on them from the time that he was like a skinny young kid. So
yeah, I mean,
takes time.
Craft is a time thing.
Yeah,
and things that you work on in the gym and work on in sparring, like first, it's not necessarily easy to learn to do these things just drilling. Then you have to make them work in sparring, and then you have to take them from sparring and you have to make them work in a fight. And that is a really, like, it's a long, there's a gestation period,
yes,
you might say, for any addition to your game, from doing it on the pads to doing it against a live opponent in sparring, to doing it against a live opponent who is really genuinely trying to take your head off.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the real phenoms so rare, is the people who can who can kind of jump the line in that kind of process. Like, it's incredibly rare to be able to just see a technique and then immediately figure out how you're going to apply it against a real genuine opponent. Like, that's an incredibly rare thing for the most part. But seeing guys who can do things like that has kind of blinded us to the fact that that's not usually how skill development works.
Yeah, there's a lot of fine tuning, a tremendous amount of fine tuning and pressure testing any new addition to your game has to go through before the average fighter or even the elite fighter can successfully incorporate it into their game. Yeah, I agree with you. So that's why defense takes time, and I think it probably will come, or it doesn't, and anyway, it's just an incredibly fun knockout puncher for the time being, and I'm okay with either of those, frankly. Just getting to watch him fight is pretty great. We don't have a lot of time to talk about Juan Francisco Estrada versus Carlos Cuadras. We'll move on very quickly, but it was a banger, and Juan Francisco Estrada looked like, once again, like one of my favorite fighters. I want to talk. I just want to say this. I want to say, people talk about Mexican style, and the idea is that Mexican style is like crazy aggressive brawling, which is more what I would call like Korean style. Like, there are regions of the world that produce those kinds of fighters really consistently, but I don't think Mexicans. I think it's kind of disrespectful to Mexican boxing history and culture to say that like crazy wars are what they do best in fighters, because I think a Mexican boxer, someone who exemplifies what Mexican boxing is all about, someone who works the body very well, who throws vicious combination punches, and who can incorporate those skills into their own style. And that's Juan Francisco Estrada. In the same way that Juan Manuel Marquez was like Mexico's answer to the American counterpuncher, or you could say Canelo Alvarez is like Guadalajara's answer to Detroit defensive boxing. Somebody like Juan Francisco Estrada, he embodies those Mexican traits, but he is also a very smooth and very intelligent boxer. And the fight was great.
Yeah, I don't really have all that much to say about the fight itself, aside from the fact that it was fun and you should watch it. And I think Estrada Rungvisai is the fight that they're planning on doing next, and
sounds amazing.
I think that's going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
It sounds phenomenal, man. Like, Estrada is still more in his prime than Gonzalez is at 27. He's getting better still, and he also comes to go to war. So as entertaining, as like action-packed as all the rounds that Gonzalez and Rungvisai shared were, I think that Estrada versus Rungvisai would be very similar. And wasn't there a weird thing where they read the wrong scorecards at the end of this fight? I think like they announced that Cuadras had won, and but I was glad they were wrong, because Estrada fought a really good fight, and Estrada Rungvisai sounds amazing. All right, let's wrap up this segment. When we come back, Triple G, Canelo Alvarez, Rockhold Branch. Two of those things are not like the other two in terms of excitement, but we have a lot of interesting things to say about Triple G Canelo. We're going to do our as best as we can to cram them into this next segment and tell you all the most interesting wrinkles about this fight after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. We're going to start things off. Gennady Golovkin is fighting Canelo Alvarez. We've been waiting. We've been waiting a very long time for this fight. Fortunately, not as long as we did for Pacquiao Mayweather, but even just for Gennady Golovkin to have an opponent that is truly compelling, like not somebody who surprises us and puts on a competitive performance, but someone who we say, I need to see this person fight Gennady Golovkin, this is the fight. We're going to talk. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to unclick my mute button on my microphone and I got screwed up there for a minute.
That's okay.
Yeah, this is the fight that everybody's been waiting for Triple G, and I think to some extent for Canelo too.
Yeah.
I think especially after Canelo got in there with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in just like a pure money grab fight the last time out. Like it's interesting to me to see this fight from the perspective of both guys' careers, because Triple G, like there's trying to get the right guys to fight him at the right time has always been tough. And he's just blown the doors off of so many guys, but he's also such a cult figure that like trying to find the right time to break him through into the mainstream has been hard to do. Like he's got a very small but very passionate fan base. Like he's really almost like a regional fighter in some meaningful ways. Like his fan base is very... Yeah,
for hardcore boxing fans, he's like every hardcore boxing fan's hometown fighter.
Yeah, but also very heavily in Southern California. Like he like sells out here. And Canelo, by contrast, like Canelo's a guy who felt a lot like a hype job early in his career and kind of was a hype job early in his career, even though the talent was there and the talent was obvious. Like they kind of built him into a superstar before he was really superstar skill wise.
Yeah.
And now at this point, as a 27-year-old with like all these fights under his belt, he really is everything they made him out to be early in his career.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could. I think like promoters and managers and fans could identify that there was something special about Alvarez, but you could argue that they overhyped him without also having to say that he doesn't deserve to be hyped. I think they just got ahead of themselves a little bit with the promotion, and that now we can see he's delivered on those expectations. He has turned into the fighter we hoped he would be, better, I think, than the fighter we hoped he would be. Because, again, we can talk about the Mexican style or whatever, but Canelo Alvarez is one of the best defensive fighters in the sport today. And that is probably not something you thought you would say about him when he was fighting even like the Austin Trout fight, which was only, like 3 or 4 years ago at this point?
Yeah, 4?
Yeah.
But that was right before he fought Floyd, wasn't it? So
Yeah.
a little over 4 years ago?
That was kind of like his like breakthrough as I'm going to be the guy who fights Floyd. That was like his I'm announcing myself as a contender win. And it was like a fight where people were impressed because he was showing off a lot more defense than he had in other fights. But even then, you wouldn't think we're going to be praising this guy for being really, really difficult to hit clean in 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Canelo, his game to me is he's such the perfect boxer puncher that in the sense that like he does everything well and he has preferences for things that he likes to do, but he can kind of do everything. And his style kind of, to me, there are words to describe Gennady Golovkin's style. Like if somebody says Golovkin, you have particular things that you can talk about. Canelo's style to me is a little harder to pin down to its core of what it actually is.
And I think I know why that is. Because to me, Canelo Alvarez just embodies correct boxing. Like he just embodies being very fundamentally sound. And even earlier before, as we just said, defense tends to come along over time. But before it started to fully be realized, his defensive skill, you could have said even before his fight with Mayweather, this guy punches perfectly. Like his offense is disciplined as hell. And he does everything correctly. That's why his combinations looked so fast and blinding. Like the one when he finished Josecito Lopez with like the 19 straight punches in a row, he landed almost every single one. And it wasn't an accident. It wasn't just because Lopez was up against the ropes. He got every single punch just perfectly around the elbow, through the guard, put him down, hit him as he was falling 2 more times. He was a very technically sound fighter. And I think a lot of the praise for Alvarez's style has to go to his coaches. And I say that especially because boxing fans have kind of shit on them a lot, on Eddie Reynoso and I can't remember the other coach's name, the older guy. Forgive me for that. But the Reynoso team, because they don't have any other top fighters. But how can you look at what has become of Canelo Alvarez and how he's developed very methodically, constantly improving in clear but like efficient, subtle ways, and say that his coaches aren't doing the right thing with him, you know?
Yeah. He's... I think you're right in that the core of what he is a puncher, but and in the best sense, I mean that in the best sense, right? That like he has a really fine sense for how to put his punches on you and win, and to accurately place them. Like I think you hit on something really important there, that like when he hits dudes, he has a knack for hitting them clean. You know, like that's a skill. Like that's something that we've talked about with regard to some other fighters. He
moves them into his punches. I mean, like the Angulo finish when he stuck his right arm out to suggest an overhand and then just took Angulo's head off with a left uppercut. They move into his punches.
Well, and also, I mean, like the Khan finish, like that was just a perfect shot. He landed it at exactly the right angle on Amir Khan's chin.
Yeah,
like that was a perfect shot. It was as clean a shot as you are ever going to see. Yeah. Or was it the Kirkland knockout too?
That was also a clean fucking shot. Yeah, just body jab to overhand, put him out cold.
Like Canelo is not the power puncher that Golovkin is, but I think in terms of creating ways to land shots cleanly, I think he's better than Triple G by a pretty substantial margin.
Yeah. So the question is stylistically in this matchup, you know, like Canelo is a guy who does well because he is just technically very, very sharp and stays that way for 12 rounds straight. And Golovkin is a guy who has not always looked like that in his recent fights. He's had some ups and downs, but is also a fighter who does not need to be perfectly technically sharp in order to beat people. Does not need to, despite having great craft in how he places his punches as well, does not need his fights to go as perfectly in the way you might say that Canelo Alvarez does. So the interesting question is, stylistically, how do they pair up? Like, can you crystallize the styles of these two fighters in a way that expresses how the matchup will probably go?
See, I think that's the thing that's really hard for me to do with this fight. Is I think we had clear ideas about how you know fights like the Sor Rungvisai and Chocolatito rematch was going to go, not just because we'd seen it, but because we had a good handle on what those fighters were going to go out and try to do to each other. This is a little harder for me because I could see. I think Golovkin should try to get in Canelo's face from the opening bell and push him back, because Canelo can stick and move and box. Like, it's not like he doesn't know how to do that. He can, but I don't think he can do it to Triple G for long enough.
I think slow feet is the real big problem for him in that kind of fight.
Yeah, he's got real quick hands and he's got great technique and he's got great fundamental footwork, but like trying to stay away from a pressuring Triple G is a really, really hard thing to do for anybody. And it'd be even harder for Canelo to do that. But I don't know if Triple G kind of has it in his head that like now he needs to box a little bit before he lets the pressure go. And if he thinks that he needs to box a little bit before he really gets the wheels of pressure turning, then I think he's going to find himself getting hit a lot. Because he's going to throw shots and he's going to be open for the counter. And that's really where Canelo shines, is like you let your shot go, Canelo avoids it, and then he's all of a sudden going. Like I kind of think like Triple G is almost better off to just force it early. And if he eats shots, at least he'll be dictating things tactically and strategically. Yeah,
I agree. Because I think if he forces it, again, like Triple G has the luxury of being able to force things in a way that Canelo could not. He's able to go out there, and Canelo's defense is better than the vast majority of people who have fought Golovkin, and so he's more capable of surviving on the ropes. But because his feet aren't that quick, he's not that great on the move. He has developed this defense in part because he's not a great mover. You know, like he's not Floyd Mayweather, he's James Toney. He's a defensive stylist because his feet can't get him out of the way quick enough. And so that means that if you just have to give him a lot of things to worry about. A lot of things, and hit him through the guard and hit him on the elbows and just beat him up as much as you can. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I mean, again, Canelo is more capable of surviving that kind of onslaught than a lot of other opponents of Triple G's. But B, the last time that Triple G had like a really dangerous puncher in front of him was David Lemieux. And Lemieux was more power than craft, but I would say he's comparably dangerous to Canelo because of how well Canelo can place his counterpunches. And like that kind of performance was really good, and it was exactly the right performance. But if it's that kind of fight from Triple G, if he's working behind his jab, if he's trying to box some, can't Canelo Alvarez deal with that? He's not going to be flummoxed like Lemieux was.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like if you want to go out and I think if you go out and you force Canelo to outbox, then that's one thing. But if you kind of stand in the middle of the ring with him and just box with him,
yes,
rather than forcing him to box, which is not the same thing. Like there's a real distinction that I want to draw there. If you just box with Canelo, I think Canelo is going to win that. Yeah. Because he can pick you off a shot or two at a time with those gorgeous counters. You can he will let his defense roll, and then if Golovkin is relying on a couple of rounds of doing that to find some momentum to get his pressure going, he's going to get stalled right out of the gate.
Right.
That momentum is never going to come for him because I don't think he's going to clearly win those exchanges. Like I think Canelo can jab with him and keep it close enough and will pick him off with counters if he tries to fight that kind of fight in the middle of the ring. Like Golovkin really needs to dictate where and at what pace the fight takes place.
It needs to be a chase, not a dance. You know, like if he has to, like you said, he has to make Canelo box to survive. He can't agree to box with him.
Yes.
And because, you know, like Triple G can do those things pretty well. He does have a great jab, and when we talk about Golovkin, especially in a matchup like this, we have to say, like, he's not a brute. He has he thinks about what he's doing, and he places his shots well, and he also comes from a very serious, technically focused school of boxing techniques, and so he also places his punches and sets them up and puts them together really intelligently. But I don't think he could jab successfully with Canelo for more than a few rounds, because like Canelo's not going to run out of ideas for new ways to hit you with his jab, you know, or for a way to hit you with a jab just long enough that you try to really commit with one, and then he nails you with a right hand counter as you go for the jab. Or like the Chavez Jr. fight was not great, and it was pretty tepid, but it was tepid because it was one-sided. Canelo Alvarez spent 12 rounds just thinking of new ways to hit Chavez Jr. in the face and the body, to counter him, to jab him. You can't give him that reach. You've got to eat up that space if you're Gennady Golovkin, I think. And so how do you think Golovkin's going to approach it? Like, what is there any way that you can make a prediction for how he's going to fight, or do we just kind of have to wait and see?
I think we're going to have to wait and see, because we've seen both of these approaches from Golovkin. We've seen him come out of the gate like a maddened bull and just really get after guys, and then we've seen him kind of sit back and gauge things for a while before they go. I don't think he can afford to give away early rounds in this fight, the way he kind of gave away the first round or so to Danny Jacobs. Mm-hmm. I don't think he can do that here, especially because this isn't something that we have talked about yet, but Canelo's such a good body puncher and such a dedicated body puncher that if he sits back and just kind of lets Canelo pick and choose some shots and doesn't push the pace, like I think I don't want to strip it purely down to a numbers thing, but like Golovkin really does his best work, and this is consistent, when he's throwing 55, 60, 70 punches a round. Yeah. That's really his pace. If he's throwing 40, 45, 50 punches, 50 is kind of borderline, but if he's throwing 45 or so punches, 40 to 45, that's not enough. Yeah. And that doesn't suit his game. And if they're working at that pace, Canelo's single shots, Canelo working at that pace is going to be more effective than Triple G working at that pace.
Especially because even if they throw the exact same number of punches, there's a difference in punching power, but there's also, I think, a pretty considerable difference in defensive capability. Yeah, that Canelo is just much harder to hit than Triple G.
Yeah, Canelo is much more likely to, if they both throw 45 punches, Canelo is probably going to get hit with 15 of those, and Triple G is probably going to get hit with 20 of those.
Yeah, that's
somewhere
about it.
Like in crude terms.
Yeah, and if hopefully for Canelo that's enough to win rounds. Hopefully for Triple G, the shots he does land are clean enough. But it is very difficult to say. A lot of how this fight will play out, I think, is contingent on sort of the strategies both guys bring into it. But fortunately, because in 2 weeks, coming up next weekend, the UFC event that weekend is Shogun versus St. Preux 2, the rematch we've all been clamoring for. We are going to have a lot of time, hopefully, on next week's episode to recap this fight. So unfortunately, we have limited time to preview it. But next week, provided
real quick, what's your prediction?
I'm going with Canelo. I think Canelo's going to take a unanimous decision.
It's hard for me to say because I've been such a big fan of Triple G for so long, but I also think Canelo's going to win.
I mean, the other thing we can't leave this prediction without also saying that it like Gennady Golovkin's kind of getting old too. Like it's not just that Alvarez is like a terrible style matchup and Triple G doesn't have a chance, he might kind of be in Roman Gonzalez's shoes. Sort of coincidentally, since both guys were kind of marketed together by HBO with mixed success. But some of his recent performances where he's had surprisingly competitive bouts with unheralded opponents, he's might just be getting old, slowing down a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, like Jacobs looked amazing when they fought.
For sure.
Jacobs looked really, really, really good. Like that was the best Danny Jacobs by a long stretch. But still, like there were a lot of things about that fight that did not make me feel good about Triple G moving forward.
And the Kell Brook fight before that, Triple G, like the way I saw him hunting for the left hook, and it was too obvious. Like Triple G's intentions, if they're obvious, then he's half the fighter he is when he's setting things up. You know, like you don't, if you see his punches come, because speed isn't his advantage. Surprise isn't his advantage in that sense. He times you. He makes you into a target. He sets you up. He moves your hands. He puts you in the corner. If he comes in and looks a little slow and is lunging after Canelo, then I don't know. It could be disappointingly one-sided if Golovkin really has aged overnight, which is always something that can happen. But that has to be considered as one of the factors going into my prediction for Canelo, that I think Canelo is heading into his prime and Triple G is just leaving his. All right, Rockhold Branch. A few quick words before we wrap up. We've only got a couple minutes. What about it?
Man, what a weird main event, and yet somehow a completely fitting main event.
Yeah.
For a UFC fight night in Pittsburgh going head to head with Canelo Triple G.
Yeah.
Like it feels exactly like the card that you would put on if you were trying to go head to head with
for
Canelo
sure.
Triple G.
Yeah, I look at this card, I think head and shoulders. This is neck and neck with with the Triple G Canelo card in terms of excitement.
Yeah. So it's a good fight. I think it's a compelling fight in a division that has no idea what the fuck it's doing. No idea where it's going. I don't think we have any real idea what to expect from Luke Rockhold. He's been out for a year and a half. He got knocked out badly by Michael Bisping. This is a fight that Rockhold should win and should win handily. Yeah. He should be able to stuff Branch's takedowns. He should be able to beat him in the clinch, and when they're at range, Rockhold should be able to pick him off a shot or two at a time. But I worry a very great deal about Rockhold's chin, because of years of sparring at AKA, because of that last knockout. I worry a lot about whether Rockhold is going to be able to take flush shots moving forward. He's been working a lot with Henry Hooft, which I think is probably good. He needs a more kind of a long-term replicable striking game than he's had in the past. Yeah. But I worry about, and especially given all the injuries that Rockhold's had too, I worry a lot about him physically just kind of falling off a cliff.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much reason to worry. Like, Rockhold doesn't have the greatest chin. That much is clear. But I don't think it. Like, I've seen him take shots, and I hope at least that it hasn't completely been cracked at this point. And I'll wait to see it cracked again before I can confidently say that, like, Michael Bisping was the last time we would go into a Rockhold fight thinking he wasn't going to get knocked out.
But see, it wouldn't be the Bisping fight. It would be years of having sparred with Cain Velasquez and Daniel Cormier and all the rest of those dudes. That's what would do it.
True. That is one reason that I'm excited that Rockhold's training with Hooft. I think Hooft is automatically much like, even though I know he likes hard sparring, I've seen footage of like Combat Club and Black Zillion's fighters training under him. I've seen like Nikki Holtzkin visiting and training with them, and it's not just reckless, crazy hard sparring. There's hard sparring with a purpose, and they also do a lot of partner drilling, a lot of light controlled sparring to figure out your setups, and of course, hearkening back to our infamous argument about Rockhold Bisping too before it played out, like Henry Hooft is the guy who would negate my argument on that episode, who would turn, like the most likely guy in the sport probably, to turn Luke Rockhold into a fighter who has a nuanced and deep set of striking skills, which is what he was lacking before. They were just like, he was kind of covering up some of the holes. He was covering up some of the holes in his game with his, by being a very good innate fighter and understanding his distance, but he didn't have like, I've gotten sick of using the word system after Mayweather McGregor, but he didn't have like a systematic approach to striking, and Henry Hooft fighters do. He was
Luke Rockhold. It's kind of easy to forget this because he didn't fight that much early in his career because he was dealing with injuries, and like we don't feel like we've seen all that much of Luke Rockhold, but Rockhold is really a fighter of the Anthony Pettis type. in a lot of meaningful ways. He's even more physically gifted relative to his competition than Pettis is. But I think there are a lot of, and the fact that he spent so long training at AKA and that he had such an elite grappling game for so long, I think that made him more successful than Pettis. But he suffered from, I think, a lot of the same kind of problems with him being a hyper athletic guy who could basically do whatever he wanted on the feet.
Yeah, who felt no need to shore up those holes.
Yeah. So, but I think a guy like that, if you're durable, if you can stick around, if you can stay in the gym and learn some new tricks, like, you've got some life to you, because those gifts don't necessarily go away overnight.
Yeah.
You know, like, Rockhold is still going to be much faster than Dave Branch.
Oh yeah.
He's still going to hit a lot harder than Dave Branch. He's still going to have better timing than Dave Branch.
Yeah. And
so
he's still probably going to find something nasty after stuffing a takedown against Dave Branch. But it is like, whether or not he turns into the fighter I hope he can be under Hooft does hinge on how much punishment he may have taken up to this point in his career.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the most likely scenario here involves Branch kind of desperation shooting into a bad takedown, leaving his neck out there, and then discovering that there's levels to a kind of to grappling with Luke Rockhold.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to forget, given the knockout at the hands of Michael Bisping and what he did to Chris Weidman on the feet in that fight. But, like, Luke Rockhold made Chris Weidman look like an amateur in their grappling exchanges.
Yeah.
And Chris Weidman is a very, very, very good grappler.
Yes.
Like, and Rockhold played with him.
Yeah, Rockhold is a massive grappling wizard. He's like a very big athlete who is exceptionally skilled on the ground. And I'm excited about this fight for the simple fact that Branch is going to try to take Rockhold down, and that is when we see the best of Rockhold's grappling game.
Yeah, he's a counter grappler and a counter wrestler. That's really his game. Like, and that's not what we're used to seeing in MMA. But like, if you actually watch, you know, freestyle or collegiate wrestling, or freestyle or folk style wrestling, or like not so much in jiu-jitsu, I guess, but like counter wrestling is a style.
Yeah.
That is a style that a lot of elite wrestlers play with, is
Daniel
kind of
Cormier.
counter wrestling. Yeah, Daniel Cormier is a good example of that. Like, so that's a style that Rockhold plays really well. It's just not one that we see a whole lot. We're used to seeing much more proactive wrestling and grappling.
Yeah, but unfortunately for him, like, it does seem kind of obvious that I'm saying this now, but the counter wrestler style in MMA does kind of rely on you having a very good idea of what you're doing on the feet. So Henry Hooft, I think, is the right move. And I think Luke Rockhold is like just genuinely a self-assured asshole enough that Henry Hooft won't be able to break down his ego and make him feel bad about himself. Like, I saw Luke Rockhold on that dating show. I think he really just cares about himself more than he cares about other people, and that is not a bad quality to have as a fighter. To just be, to be confident. Like, that's the kind of guy who does well under Hooft, because then, by the way, Henry Hooft, we should say too, has been working on being nicer in the corner. I think noticeably has not been he hasn't told people not to give up in a while. In that bullying way of his. So, but Rockhold, I think, like Robbie Lawler, is probably, you know, self-aware enough that he can take Hooft's criticisms as instructions, as corrections, rather than as in any kind of impugnment of him as a person. So I hope to see a very skillful striking performance from Rockhold. I hope to see, like, I think he's athletically gifted enough that if this new training takes root, it could be a night and day difference.
Yeah, agreed. Real quick, what do you think of Mike Perry versus Thiago Alves?
It's an interesting fight. I think the temptation for most people would be to say that Mike Perry is an easy favorite over Thiago Alves, but I think Thiago Alves is eminently capable of doing a lot of the things Jake Ellenberger was doing to give Mike Perry problems, or perhaps more astutely, I should say, the things that Alan Jouban did to beat Mike Perry. So, you know, but also, like, Thiago Alves is like an old guy who's like been injured a lot of times. So I understand the idea that he shouldn't be favored over Mike Perry, but technically Thiago Alves he continues to actually add new little wrinkles to his striking game. He's still a very, very smart and well put together kickboxer. So I don't know.
Thiago Alves is only 33 years old.
Yeah, but he's like he's like Joe Louis. He's 137 in fight years.
No, I mean, he's like, but somehow he's only 33.
Somehow.
Like, that's mind blowing. He won't turn 34 until next month. But yeah,
I kind of think he might win.
I think if he doesn't get caught, he's going to win.
Yeah.
I think it's literally that simple.
Yeah.
Perry is not a craftless fighter, but he can't go craft for craft with Thiago Alves. So the real question is, does Perry catch him with an enormous shot at one point? And it's entirely possible that he could.
Oh, like, it's likely even.
Yeah, I mean, Alves is a good defensive fighter, but he's also aggressive enough that he spends a lot of time in ranges where he can be hit. Mm-hmm. So Perry timing him with kind of a natural counter or sliding in a shot like the one that he landed on Ellenberger, like that's entirely possible that he can do that. So I think I lean toward Perry finding that one shot. I think he's tough enough to take Alves' shots, but it would not at all surprise me if Alves just like stomped him on the way to a one-sided decision.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to expect a lot of praise and recognition if this is correct. But here's my Nostradamus-like prediction for if Perry wins. Here's the shot it will be: a straight right hand as Thiago Alves plants his feet and tries to counter with a left hook. Like that's the kind of stuff that puts Alves in trouble. That like Cote got in a right hand that way when Alves was against the fence and he was like, "Oh, I can hit him as he comes in," but he took a shot as he hit Cote. And those are the kind of exchanges that don't, like, they work against fighters that aren't Mike Perry in a way that they don't work against Mike Perry. Because if he just follows, like, you can hit him on the ear with the hook, but if he hits you on the chin with the right, he's going to win the exchange and probably the fight with that shot. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, actually. Like, I don't think I realized I kind of thought Thiago Alves might win before we talked about it. But Thiago Alves still has things to show, man. The Cote fight was super impressive. So
Yeah, I mean, he's right in our veteran wheelhouse, you know?
For
like
sure.
Dudes who have been around for a long time, have seen it all and done it all, been in the gym for a while. Like, guys like that, if they can stay healthy for a little while and put together a good training camp, can put on fantastic performances.
Yeah, because the experience matters. You know, all that time, like all the time it takes to get your defense working, that process continues indefinitely. It's just a matter of how able are you to call upon all of those skills and all that knowledge as your body deteriorates. That's the struggle. But Alves is still, I think, probably learning new things about how to outstrike people. And I think that's pretty compelling. Pretty solid card, actually. It's not that bad. Kamaru Usman on here, Gregor Gillespie, Tony Martin, Olivier Aubin-Mercier. It just has the misfortune of running up against Triple G Canelo. And if you have a choice, Heavy Hands listeners, please let us both advise you to watch the boxing match instead. Catch this one after the fact. It's not that it's a bad card. It's kind of a weird card. But Triple G Canelo is a gangbusters fight. And it's not only exciting because of what it means and who the fighters are, it should be a really fun fight to watch, too. As most Golovkin fights are, and as most Canelo fights are, especially when he's in there with, you know, a live body. So that's about it for this show. Ran a little long, but that's all right. Not too much longer than usual, actually. Pat, what do you have coming out this week before we wrap?
Not a whole lot of anything, actually. I've got a new episode of Tides of History coming out. On the experience of being a mercenary during the 15th and 16th centuries. I think it's maybe my favorite episode I've ever done of a podcast. So give it a listen. I think if you've been on the fence about listening to Tides of History, give it a shot. I think you'll really like it. Otherwise, that's about it.
Nice.
I'm not writing anything. I wrote a whole bunch of stuff for last week's card that we didn't end up getting to use because it's all about Demetrius Johnson.
That is a letdown.
I'd like to personally thank Ray Borg for reaching into my pocket and taking hundreds of dollars in freelance article payments out. Thank you, Ray Borg.
I'm sorry, Ray. Pat's just incensed right now. He doesn't mean it.
Son of a bitch.
We understand. It's okay.
I kid. It's fine. I understand. I'm not that mad.
Not that mad. As for me, Triple G Canelo article will be coming out this week. That one's actually mostly done, so keep an eye out for that midweek. If you haven't listened to it already, go check out the free episode of The Historical Perspective that I uploaded. Kyle McLaughlin, boxing historian. No, not Agent Cooper from Twin Peaks. Yes, yet another person said that on the YouTube video when I mentioned Kyle's name. Kyle is... Someday that man is going to blow his brains out because someone says he's the actor from Twin Peaks, because it's all I ever see people say to him online. In fact, he's not an actor, but a very knowledgeable boxing guy, and we basically went through his top 10 pound-for-pound rankings and took advantage of the recent events to compare those fighters to Floyd Mayweather and try to put Floyd into what we think is the appropriate context for him as an all-time great. Not the greatest ever, but among their number, and here is why he's not the greatest ever. Here are the 10 guys who deserve to be at the top of the mountain. So that was fun. If you haven't checked it out, go listen to it, and then future episodes of that show will be available to Patreon subscribers on the Heavy Hands Patreon. Check us out on there, bonus content, all that stuff, and check us out on social media. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter, and me at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H. You can find us both on our respective Facebook pages, facebook.com/PatrickWymanMMA and facebook.com/Conor Ruebusch MMA, and share the podcast with your friends. Say good things about it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We hope you're excited about the fights. We will see you again next week to gush on and on about Triple G Canelo. Boy, I really hope it happens now, because now that I'm talking about it this way, somebody's going to get injured. But if the fight happens, next week we're going to have a lot of things to say about it, and we'll see you then. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, first of all, thank you for choosing this particular podcast, and secondly, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.